What's up guys, I'm Phoenix Master 1 and welcome to my refined review and builds guide for Summer Lyn, Fallen Delthea, Fallen Tiki, Lethe and Yarne. So let us begin with Summer Lyn, who is definitely the winner of this batch, and she gets a really amazing weapon refine that can make her into a solid armor slayer, and especially for slaying one of the new top tier armors in duo Duma. So she now gets plus 8 to all of her stats in combat, and she also gains -1 special cooldown, and she already had the armor effective damage before. And this weapon refine also provides her with the half of null follow-up, the offensive part essentially, so that allows her to bypass a lot of the follow-up negation effects of so many armor units. And she also has null guard, which means that she can trigger a 2 cooldown special like Ruptured Sky or Moonbow on her second hit. And finally, because this is Lyn, she has to get her copyrighted effect, which is basically having a speed check so that she can get the fire sweep effect against the melee units. So you could consider this like a melee sweep in a sense, because it also gives her the fire sweep effect against the dragons as well as the physical units. So she's only going to be facing counter attacks against the mages and staff units, and they're not going to be the biggest targets of Lyn to begin with a weapon like this. A lot of people did get Forma Summer Lyn like 2 months ago, so your Forma soul has definitely been invested well with this kind of really good weapon refine. And like I said, she is, in my opinion, the winner of this batch, and she's definitely going to be useful in Summoner Duels as in Aether Raids defense, and also for just the general content for taking on a lot of the armor units. Now the thing with Lyn is that she doesn't have the highest attack stat, and she doesn't really get the extra, true damage from any of these effects. So she's going to be struggling against the armors who have null armor weakness like Ascended Idun and Brave Hector, and those are unfortunately the most common armor safe tanks. So you definitely have to watch out against them. And if you're looking for another far safe tank buster, then Lethe Yarne is also really amazing, who has true damage that scales off his speed. So Lyn doesn't really hit as hard as someone like Lethe Yarne, but still she can take on a lot of armor units, be it magical or physical, because of the fire sweep effect in her weapon. And she can also take care of duo Duma, who is a red armor, so having weapon strangle advantage against him is going to be really helpful. And duo Duma is definitely going to be seen quite a bit because of his unique defensive effect, so Summer Lyn is going to be a pretty nice unit to have against him. But like I mentioned before, you definitely want to stack up attack on her so that she can do most amount of damage to a lot of the armor units, even if she cannot kill them. And she can run Deadeye, but unfortunately she doesn't have access to Flashing Blade. So providing her support from Warbreaker of Thor or Summer Thor is going to be helpful, but a lot of times it is going to be a bit awkward, and using Heavy Blade with her is not going to be the best because she doesn't really have the highest attack stat. So a 2 cooldown special is going to be working out fine, or if you can pulse down Deadeye by using Asker or Legendary Hector, that is also preferable. So if you want to build up Summer Lyn on a budget, then you can just run Life and Death and run Poison Strike. So this is a build that is going to be useful for the general, in-game content, for limited hero battles, for arena assault. Life and Death on a budget is a fine skill because she's not going to be getting counter-attacked by most of her opponents, and you can run Poison Strike so that you can do some chip damage to them, because especially with these kinds of non-premium skills and low investment, Summer Lyn is definitely not going to be able to kill a lot of armor units despite having the effective damage. So Poison Strike is a pretty nice budget skill. Now if you got Forma Lyn, then you probably got a build similar to this with attack speed catch 4 with a menace skill or a range skill. So that build still stays pretty strong and you can easily run this kind of build. Deadeye becomes a 2 cooldown special, which is going to be a bit annoying to trigger on her follow-up attack. But you can always give her the Warbreaker support or Brave Lucina support, or you could also just pulse her down with Asker or Legendary Hector or even Raphael. So all of those things can work, and you can also use her with the Unity skill, and this is especially going to be helpful in Summoner Duels S, where you can, just have her against the duo Duma, who is a red armor, and she doesn't really care about the guard effect of Duma or the follow-up negation and the half null follow-up that he has in his weapon. So she's going to be able to do a pretty fantastic job, and also hurt him really badly if you got Ruptured Sky, and even Deadeye can work if you can, just pulse it down a bit. So this build can also work if you got attack speed Unity and the range skill. And she can also be used in Aether Raids defense with a Brattle Catria team because of her armor effective damage. But keep in mind that Ascended Fiorm is going to be a pretty big threat to this kind of Lyn. So make sure to run a good amount of red units that can threaten Ascended Fiorm, like Duo Crom or units like those, Volk for example. So you can definitely try and do that so that Lyn can do her job and take out the other armor units. or at least attack them for a lot of damage. Guard is going to be pretty useful in Aether Raids defense, as you can prevent the special charges of the opponents, especially to their damage reduction specials if they're running Hardy Fighter. And a Neon skill doesn't really do too much in Aether Raids defense other than give you the debuff, so I do like Guard a lot here. And attack speed unity is especially pretty nice for Aether Raids defense, where people are going to be running Sabotage Attack on Milla and Temari Dagger on Air, so it can definitely help you with the debuffs. And you can also run her in Arena with B Dual Flank 4, and she can run attack speed Oath 4 so that she can get even more offenses. This is definitely an expensive option and not an option that was possible in the Hall of Forms, but this could be nice for the mobility in Arena. And finally, this is a bit of a weird build, but it could be useful for the Rooker Siege, especially with her Wind Sweep effect and the fact that she's got armor effective damage. So this can allow you to just have the guard effect, and you can just stack up Triangle Adept to do even more damage to a lot of the red Rookers, especially if that is an armor Rooker like red or blue armor Rooker. Then she's going to be able to do quite a bit of damage, and then Breath of Life can just heal up your dancers or the other units which the Rooker is going to be attacking. I don't usually do the Rooker builds because they are pretty obvious, but I think that Summer Lyn definitely deserves a mention because I'm definitely going to be using her quite a lot because of that, and being a blue bow flyer is quite rare in itself, and also having the armor effective damage, and she is also going to be having the effective damage against flyers, so against a lot of the Rooker units she's going to be having good matchups and definitely help you get the max 200,000 score. Fallen Delthea gets her weapon refined to the Death Tome, and now she can function as a much better offensive unit. And when it comes to the free-to-play mages, she's definitely pretty unique because of the teleportation. So she can get +9 to all of her stats in combat, and she still has the 4 recall damage after the combat, which is actually not the worst thing if you're trying to use her as a Wings of Mercy beacon. And she pretty much has a way of lull speed resistance built into this weapon, so you don't really need to run that in her slot B. So she can utilize any kind of bonuses to foe speed and resistance, and the penalty depends on the maximum special cooldown count of Delthea. So the lowest special cooldown count is going to be 2 with Glimmer Moonbow, so there she can get -3 speed and resistance, and the highest is going to be -6 speed and resistance if you run a 5 cooldown special. So yeah, it just works on her maximum special cooldown, but most of the time you're just going to be running 2 or 3 cooldown specials. And the most useful effect out of this weapon is the fact that she can have a 2-space teleportation. So this is a reference to the witches in Shadows of Valentia, and this 2-space teleport is similar to that of Halloween Noe, Spring Sonia, Ninja Green. So we have seen this effect before, but having this on an infantry free-to-play blue mage is definitely pretty amazing because she does have access to a lot of the infantry-only skills. So it doesn't really mean that she's going to be a lot broken AoE nuke than Spring Sonia, for example, but still she can function with a lot of the infantry skills, and definitely that's not bad for a free-to-play unit. I can definitely see her being used a bit in Aether Raids offense as a Wings of Mercy beacon, and she could also be used in Aether Raids defense because of this teleportation. And in Summoner Duels S, she could be used especially with the Erosion Captain skill so that she can nuke with a hard-hitting special, and this kind of teleportation can definitely be pretty threatening to a lot of the units, especially if they don't have a very solid safe tank. But a lot of times if there's going to be some kind of very strong safe tank, then Fallen Delthea is not going to be having the best chances of getting past them, as it is the case with a lot of mages, because they just get walled by Hardy Fighter and Deflect Magic armors, so you have to watch out for those kinds of opponents. Fallen Delthea unfortunately doesn't have the highest speed for the modern times, so on a budget I guess you could run her with Desperation and Null Follow-Up. Null Follow-Up is a new Sacred Seal, and that is going to be pretty good for getting past the follow-up negation effects, but still she can get more speed with this kind of weapon even at this kind of low investment, and Speed Smoke can help you further. But I would only really suggest you to invest heavily into her if you're trying to +10 merge her. And if that is the case, then you can also make a Fallen Delthea build from the Divine Code section with having Swiss Sparrow 3, and you can of course run Wind Sweep with Null Follow-Up, as it can be on a lot of mages. So she is definitely a unit who can also run that. And for investing a bit more into her, I would definitely suggest foddering a Brave Marianne for her Unity skill and Null Follow-Up. So as it says, Fallen Delthea is going to be teleporting within 2 spaces of an ally, so she is going to be always having the Unity skill active, which is really helpful whenever she's getting debuffed or she's getting panicked, and this just has good synergy with that. And same goes for Joint Drive Speed and the Form Sacred Seal. You can run Glimmer as a 2 cooldown special, which is essentially going to be giving you lull speed resistance with her weapon, but you can always run a 3 cooldown special like Iceberg, especially at low investment, or if you're running something like Windsweep. So both 2 and 3 cooldown specials are going to be working fine with Delthea. And you can also run her with attack speed finish, which we have now with Halloween female Corin. So this is going to be basically offsetting the chip damage that she's going to be taking. So this is more of a, mixed phase build. And because of the null follow-up secret seal, she can just run speed resistance tempo in her slot B and always trigger Glimmer in a single round of combat. Even if the opponent cannot counter attack, she can still trigger her Glimmer on the second attack. And that is going to be the case with some of the armor units as well. So this can always be run, and you can also run this with a 3 cooldown special like Iceberg or with Draconic Aura. But it is going to be only increasing your debuffs by 1 point, so it really depends if you want to run a 2 cooldown special or a 3 cooldown one. You can also max invest into her with Speed Smoke 4 and the finish kill. So this is a crazy expensive build that can function in the mixed phase, can give her the self-sufficiency with the healing and the extra damage, and also give her the damage reduction with Speed Smoke 4 at the max investment. And with a build like this, you definitely want to have bonus doublers so that she can just be a bigger stat ball, especially with this kind of weapon refine. And then you can also use her in arena with B-Duel Infantry 4. Again, this is the game mode where bonus doubler is going to be helping you just get the extra stats so that you can actually tank some of the units, because her HP is not the worst when it comes to the mages, and especially with B-Duel Infantry 4 giving you extra bulk, it is going to be helping in some clutch moments. And you can also run attack resistance menace so that you can instantly buff herself up and also hit really hard in the player face a lot of the times. Now let's move on to some of the spicy builds for Delthea. So Life and Death with the AoE build is definitely going to be unexpected on her, and this is actually going to be having anti-synergy with one of the refined effects of her weapon, which requires the enemy to be at 75% HP or above. So the AoE special is going to be chipping away that HP, but keep in mind that this build is going to be still very powerful in Summoner Duels S at this kind of max investment. And this is basically like Spring Sonia if she was infantry unit and if she was a lot harder to pre-charge. So you would definitely need some support with Asker, Raphael, Veluria, all of those units to pre-charge her AoE special. So definitely try and do that, and especially when we have Secret Maneuver as the captain skill, it is going to be a lot easier to do this. So you can threaten a large amount of area with her teleportation and this kind of AoE special, and especially if you catch the unit with your AoE special, it is going to be very powerful. And this can also be really good on maps where you have a wall in the middle, so she can teleport past the wall and just hit the enemy with this kind of AoE special. And Speed Preempt can actually be a pretty fun and unexpected effect which could catch some of the people off guard. So you have probably seen some Spring Sonias run this, and that is the same reason for Delthea here as well. So after she has done the chip damage with the AoE special, she can, just vantage units with this kind of speed preempt. And this build definitely needs a lot of team building around it, but can definitely be fun with the AoE special. And you can also use her with Double Fury build in Aether Raids offense as a Wings of Mercy beacon. So in 2 rounds of combat, despite her HP, she's going to be falling into the Wings of Mercy range, as in a single combat she's going to be losing 18 HP, and then after the second combat she's going to be in the Wings of Mercy range. Personally, as someone who uses a lot of Galeforce strategies, this would definitely not be my first priority, because it takes an action of a dancer to fall into the Wings of Mercy range. So it is not the most ideal scenario really, and using a Winter Bernadetta or just falling into the Wings of Mercy range in the first combat is a lot more helpful. So you could use this as a counter pick unit, I guess, for some of the teams where she can fall into the Wings of Mercy range in the first combat. So that is going to be more preferable. So you can just run null follow up, which is going to be helping you a lot. And you can also pulse down units like Asker, Ash, and other Galeforce units. And if you like Fallen Delthea a lot, then her chip damage is basically something that you can use productively in Aether Raids offense. Finally, she could also be used in Aether Raids defense in the Anima season as a nuke. So she can just teleport with her weapon refine, and that is really good for catching the opponents off guard. But if they've got a good save ball, then not much is going to be catching them off guard. Still, you can try and run Windsweep and null follow up to annoy their save tanks, as long as they're not dragons or ascended Fiarm. So again, have some team support in our team so that you can cover for the bad matchups. And you can run, Time Pulse so that you can have Ruptured Sky trigger on the second hit. Or you could even run Colorless Feud, which is going to be helping you a lot in the Anima season, because we do have Ashera, we do have Elamine especially, who can provide the damage reduction. So you're going to be taking away the damage reduction of a lot of safe tanks who run Elamine if you run Colorless Feud. Fallen Tiki gets a pretty decent weapon refined to her Raising Breath, which does have distant counter built into it. I feel like she does give a bit of distant counter attacks with this kind of weapon refine, but it's still not the worst refine honestly, but it's also not the most insane refine. So of course Raising Breath does have distant counter in it, and it also has a dragon effective damage, and with this weapon refine she can get +4 to all of her stats, and she also has bonus doubler built into this weapon. Now keep in mind that armor units cannot have access to bonus doublers, so having this effect definitely makes her have good synergy with her slotty skill Solitary Dream and a lot of the visible buffs, so she can be a huge stat ball essentially with the bonus doubler effect. And finally, if she has any kind of bonus active on her, then she can get the effects depending on what phase she's going to be attacking in. So in the player phase, she's able to get the guaranteed follow-up attack, which is really good for doubling. And in the enemy phase, she's going to be able to have the follow-up negation to stop the follow-up attack of a lot of the enemies, hoping that they do not have enough follow-up. So yeah, this weapon refine definitely makes her into a much better dragon tank, and especially a good, safe tank if you are going to be using her at high investment. But it definitely leaves Tiki in a bit of an awkward spot with her preferred skill, Solitary Dream, because a lot of armors nowadays are going to be relegated to being a safe tank, and if they're not relegated to being a safe tank, then there are really extraordinary units in the player phase like Summer Edelgard or even Legendary Edelgard, who at least has like 3 actions in the player phase. So a dragon like Tiki who doesn't have Blazing Storm or Galeforce is not exactly going to be the best unit in the player phase, and getting the Solitary Dream buff and the movement bonus especially is going to be a bit annoying with some of the teams, so I can already see a lot of people just replacing that with the save skill. And as a safe tank, Tiki is definitely going to be having a lot of stats, but keep in mind that we have a lot of really good colorless save armors before her who have much more optimized stat spread or just have much more optimized weapons. So a lot of times I say this, that stats are not everything in FEH, it is the unique effects. And that is the case with Tiki. She can get a lot of stats with bonus doubler and her weapon, but she lacks the unique effects, and especially at a time when we have got distant counter, Dragon Sacred Seal. So a lot of dragons can just have a really stacked weapon, an open slot A skill, and just run distant counter Dragon Sacred Seal. So that is something, Fallen Tiki is not exactly able to do. But overall, I'm not most disappointed by this weapon refine, because after seeing Sothis' refine, I really had no expectation, and bonus doubler is actually not that bad, and they did try to synergize with her slotty skill at the very least. So if you want to run her Tiki on a budget, then you should just be running her with her preferred slotty skill, and Special Fighter is fine really with this kind of build that tries to be mixed phase, and you can just run the Form, Sacred Seal, and slotty skill. This could be obtained from a 4-star Russia, so that is going to be helpful. You need to be within, some of your allies to get this, but unfortunately we don't really have too many good budget skills that Tiki could use. But if you're going to be trying to invest a bit more into her with, far safe skill, then you can definitely fodder off the free 5-star Halloween Delthea that we're going to be getting for Sturdy Stance 3 and Slick Fighter. So Slick Fighter is actually a pretty nice skill on Tiki, especially at low investment, because she's going to be depending on a lot of visible buffs to get the bonus doubler. So in the case that she gets panicked or she gets debuffed, Slick Fighter is going to be protecting you from the penalties, which is really good. And at low investment, the guard effect is going to be helpful for any kind of tank. You can also invest into her with Hardy Fighter and also run Sylvalan Shield. So this is mainly if you want to use her in Summoner Duels S, and Sylvalan Shield is basically there so that you can survive Duo Chrom. Without that, it is going to be pretty hard for you to survive even with the pre-charged Sacred Cowl and like fully buffed with bonus doubler, and that just shows you how big of a threat he is. But you could also veto him out, so if you plan to veto him out, then you can just run Distant Defense 4 in the slot A, which is going to be helping you in the Duo Dagger matchup, of course. And Sylvalan Shield is not the best slot A skill, but it kind of helps you against one of the biggest threats out there, so it could be used on a budget. And you can also run her with Distant Defense 4 in the Aether Raids defense, so she could be used in the Dark Season where Medius can buff you up for your attack and resistance, and you can also benefit from having a dragon on your team with a slot B skill. And you can also run some other dragon with maybe like double ward dragons, so that is going to be making both of these units really bulky. So Sacred Cowl is something that you want to run, and because she does have distant counter in her weapon, you can also run a Breath Sacred Seal so that you can trigger Sacred Cowl in case you get doubled. And Distant Defense 4 is really good skill for Aether Raids defense armors because a lot of people are going to be using the visible buffs, especially from Peony, so it does help you against those fully buffed opponents. Hardy Fighter is a really good skill on her as it is for a lot of armor units, so she can run a pre-charged damage reduction special, and she also gets half null follow-up with Hardy Fighter, which can definitely help her because she's not the slowest unit, so she can definitely make use of this, especially with the follow-up negation that she can get in the enemy phase with her weapon. And finally, you can use her with a speed stack build in Summoner Duels S or even Summoner Duels R. But Summoner Duels S is a bit more preferred because you could just veto out Duo Chrom because he would still kill her even at this kind of max investment, despite running any kind of skill here. But you will be forced to run like Sylvalan Shield to survive him. So you can just, ban him and just have this kind of Tiki against a lot of the range threats. And honestly, at this kind of max investment against a lot of the range threats, she is going to be doing a pretty decent job. And speed stacking is going to be helping you against a lot of the speed stacked range units. Even though like 76 speed is not the highest by the modern standards, especially of Summoner Duels, but still it's pretty decent honestly, and this can also help you not get water swept by a lot of the units who are going to be running null follow-up Sacred Seal, and especially Lethe Yarne, who can easily do that. And finally, you could also use her in Arena because you're going to be plus in merging her, and she can score as a 185 BST unit if you give her 300 passives all the way. Now, you can actually give her Distant Counter Dragon Sacred Seal, even though it's not the most optimal if you want to bump up her scoring to 190 BST, but it's really not going to be helping you in the combat, and it's probably going to be helping your opponents when they face your defense team. So yeah, Dragon Strat 4 is pretty nice with her, especially for getting those one-shots and also for getting that damage reduction. I'm going to be going over some of the builds, even though I'm not the biggest fan of them, but still, I just want to mention them before I get destroyed in the comments. So Savvy Fighter is an option with Tiki, but the reason why I don't really, recommend it over Hardy Fighter is because it is pierceable by Deadeye, Lethality, and Sublime Heaven, and a lot of those specials. So Hardy Fighter is always going to be superior for far safe tanking because you can get the better damage reduction, which is not getting pierced or shredded. So Savvy Fighter is kind of inferior in that regard, even though it does provide you with like full null follow-up and the damage reduction, and it's not the hardest thing to trigger, but still Hardy Fighter is something I would prefer, and Savvy Fighter is just way too expensive as well, so you might as well save this for some melee unit. And finally, if you want to use her in the mixed phase like she was meant to be with her Slotsy skill, then you can try and run this build with Attack Speed Ideal and Special Fighter. So Special Fighter is actually not a bad skill for the mixed phase, and the Ideal skill is going to be having good synergy with the visible buffs, and it is going to be giving her even more attack and speed. And Mystic Boost is a flexible option. It can give you the healing, which is really nice, and you can just run a high damaging special like Ignis. So most of the time, the high invested Tikis are going to be the safe Tikis, but if you want to use her in the mixed phase, then this is an option. Yarne gets a pretty decent weapon refine, and he has got more offenses now, and he can Galeforce a bit better because of the effects that he can have in this refine. So he does have the cavalry effective damage, which is definitely going to be helping him in certain matchups. And the biggest unique thing about Yarne is that he essentially has this special spiral that can activate when he's below 90% HP after the combat. Now, the thing is that Special Spiral skill itself doesn't really work with Galeforce, but the one built into Yarne's weapon does work with Galeforce, so he's able to function as a pretty good Galeforce initiator and fall into the Wings of Mercy range of his allies and essentially begin a Wings of Mercy chain on a Galeforce team. And now with this weapon refine, he's able to get plus 10 attack and speed in combat, and he also gets true damage based on 10% of his speed. And finally, if he's transformed, he can get the guaranteed follow-up attack. So the guaranteed follow-up attack essentially works like a partial null follow-up, because if you can stack enough amount of speed on him, then you can just break through a lot of the follow-up negation effects. For example, on Medius, which is going to be a really common Dark Mythic. So not the most ideal effect like an actual null follow-up, but still good to have to bypass a lot of foes, and getting the extra offenses is going to be helping him in the Galeforce. Now, as someone who Galeforces a lot in Aether Raids and has been doing it for years, from my perspective, I think that his weapon refine is actually pretty good for initiation, but not the greatest. There are a couple of reasons for that. So after getting this offensive boost, he can pretty much get an exact lethal on the most common Medius and barely survive. So that is actually good in the light season, where you can just use a lot of really good beast units like Asker, Ashe, Veluria, Raphael. So all of these units can make for a really good beast Galeforce team, and Yarne can just initiate that Galeforce, whole strategy for your team without really requiring Bernadetta, as long as you can, target Medius. But the thing is that Yarne is absolutely going to fold the moment he faces a competent near save tank or guard effect, because he unfortunately does not have any kind of null guard or special acceleration in his weapon. And like, if he faces someone like, near save Brave Edelgard, there's really not much he's going to be able to do compared to some of the other Wings of Mercy beacons like, Brave Seliph, for example, or even my AoE Brave Alm that we have seen, who certainly needs the support of Winter Bernadetta. So Yarne can definitely be situationally useful depending on your Galeforce team and depending on the team that you're going to be facing. So he's not exactly a bad unit with this weapon refine, but there are definitely certain things which you have to be aware of when using him. Guard effect and those competent near save tanks are definitely the ones that you have to watch out for. But if you're going to be facing catchy ball teams in the light season who don't really have a near save tank and you can just target Medius, then you're not going to be having much trouble really initiating the Galeforce team. So he is specifically going to be useful as a Galeforce initiator, and he definitely doubles down on his niche, but having just one or two more effects would have made him so much better. Now if you want to use him on a budget, then you can certainly use him just with Galeforce and hit and run as the slot B skill. So this can definitely work out as a retreat option and essentially a bootleg trace skill on a budget. But yeah, running the actual near trace skill is going to be optimal, and this is the exact build that you can use even at +1 merge to use him as a Galeforce initiator. And I have calced him, so he can barely survive against Medius and barely kill him, so it could work out for sure. And then you can support your other beast units with the drive attack, and you can also run him with the cat skill, which is going to be a bit more premium skill that can give you a bit more offenses. And attack speed menace is something that he can run. It's not necessarily going to be the most useful skill for Aether Raids offense, but for the other content, this menace skill does have good synergy with the cat skill. And then you can also run him with Sir Sparrow if you really don't want to run him with Galeforce. So, he is kind of made for Galeforce, but if you don't really want to run that, then Moonbow is going to be the option with Sir Sparrow so that he can get the healing and essentially, get that special damage. And you can also run him with a Clash skill at max investment. I really feel like the Clash skills are going to be the end game skills for a lot of these beast units because they don't have access to a lot of skills. So having the debuff neutralization to their attack and speed is actually really helpful for a unit like this. It is surely going to be expensive, but like I said, this is the end game skill. And finally, in Arena, he could be used with G-Duel Cavalry 4 and actually function as a pretty nice Galeforce unit. So the whole thing with Yarne is that he is going to be able to trigger Galeforce without really requiring a heavy blade or anything like that, as long as the opponent can counter attack and he can double. So he's going to be getting 3 special cooldowns off in the combat, and then his Bunny Fang is going to be giving him that -2 special cooldown after the combat if he's below 90% HP, and that is going to be pretty easy to do as long as you target these certain units. And you can also try and run, Fury or attack speed push to kind of boost that, but honestly I don't think that's needed. You can just run the premium offensive skill so that he can focus on his offenses and try to get the kills. So these are going to be the builds for Yarne. The final unit of this batch is going to be Lethe, and she actually ends up becoming really fast with this weapon refine. So with this weapon refine, she's able to get +10 attack and speed in combat, +4 defense and resistance as well. And she does get half null follow-up, the offensive version, which allows her to bypass the follow-up negation skills of a lot of units. And she also gets the +10 true damage whenever her special triggers. And finally, when she's transformed, she's able to get the special fighter effect. Actually, the special acceleration part is not really dependent on you getting transformed, but rather the guard effect, as you can see with the description. So the special acceleration is really good because she can actually trigger high cooldown specials and do a lot of damage with the true damage and essentially function as a nuke. Now, I feel like this kind of weapon refine is, at least like a year late. The reason why I say that is because it is really reminiscent of the Blazing Durandal weapon refine of Brave Roy and, Eliwood. And Eliwood was definitely a meta unit in Aether Raids, where he was really useful in Aether Raids offense, where he could target Note and still double her and just get into the Galeforce and Wings of Mercy range. And he was also popular in Aether Raids defense before the save skills, where he was either used with Galeforce and Lunge or just with Glacies to do that massive damage. So Lethe kind of functions like that, but she actually has a more modern weapon where she doesn't really have to choose between running a Trace skill or a flow guard like Eliwood, and she does have the half null follow-up in her weapon. So Trace is ultimately going to be the skill that you're going to be using in her slot B. Now, while that is pretty good and she can, nuke really hard, she's still going to be competing with like Brave Seliph or Legendary Nana when it comes to being a Red Cavalry nuke. And those units, without even requiring any kind of special, are going to be doing massive damage. So there's definitely going to be a competition in that regard. And Lethe can essentially get that bootleg null follow-up like a lot of beast units can, because they do have the impact effect when they have themselves transformed and they're going to be initiating in the player phase. And when you combine this with the half null follow-up, it essentially becomes a bootleg null follow-up. Not the whole actual null follow-up skill, but kind of works similar to that, and that's why I say bootleg, because it's not the whole skill. So Lethe can function with high cooldown specials and even with Galeforce, as you'll see. But yeah, she is going to be struggling to stand out as a Red Cavalry nuke because of the reasons which I mentioned before. So you can use her on a budget with Windsweep because of the half null follow-up in her weapon, and this can essentially allow you to initiate safely and then trigger Moonbow on your second hit because of the special acceleration, and you can just run the solo Sacred Seal. You can also run her with attack speed solo 4 and attack speed solo as the Sacred Seal and make her function as a Galeforce unit with the Near Trace skill. And at higher investments, this could definitely work in Aether Raids offense as well, but you're definitely going to be needing quite a bit of oomph to get past Medias because she doesn't exactly get the true damage as Yarne, and she is missing out on few points of attack compared to him. So definitely going to be needing some support, but it's definitely possible with Asker, Peony, and all of those units. And you can also just use her with her, what I suppose is like the best build for her, by using a 4 cooldown special in Dragon Fang. So this is going to be able to do massive amounts of damage with the plus 10 true damage that she can get, and the fact that Dragon Fang is a very strong 4 cooldown special. And with Surge Sparrow, you're going to be able to heal up so much HP, so this can be a really fun player phase build, and this is pretty much what Lethe kind of excels at with this kind of weapon, which gives her special fighter. So the guard effect is really good to not get blown up by the instant retaliation of specials from a lot of units, and then you can trigger Dragon Fang, which is going to be doing a lot of damage, provided that the opponent does not have a guard effect. So yeah, having null guard would have been immensely helpful for Lethe, and unfortunately, even when flow tempo or something like that comes out, she's not going to be able to make use of that because beast units, for whatever reason, cannot have access to the flow skill. But yeah, this is pretty much going to be the standard Lethe build, which you're going to be seeing quite a lot. You can also run her with a more mixed phase build because she does actually get plus 4 defense and resistance in combat with her weapon, and also has the guard effect. So she is definitely a lot more functionable in mixed phase compared to Yarne, who's mainly just a player phase Galeforce unit. And here she can use the damage reduction skill in Speed Smoke 4 and function as a mixed phase unit with the Cats 4 skill. So not entirely player phase like the Surge Sparrow build, and can definitely function in both phases. And I really feel like Dragon Fang is going to be the special to run here instead of Moonbow, because the massive damage that you get from Dragon Fang is just absolutely amazing, especially with the plus 10 true damage and the special acceleration. So I really like having that on Lethe. And you can also run the end game Clash skill, like I said, and this is going to be really helpful on Lethe because a lot of times Draconic Aura or Dragon Fang as the specials are going to be victim to the attack debuffs, which are going to be common. And with having this kind of debuff neutralization, you're going to be able to not really care about those offensive debuffs. So it can really solidify her role as this kind of nuke, and you can definitely run this skill. And then finally, you could also use her in Arena. Unfortunately, beast units don't really have access to Ruptured Sky or a very good 4 cooldown special, so Aether is something that you can run. You can also run Galeforce if you want to, but I feel like that plus 10 true damage can really help you just, you know, get those solid kills with Aether as a damaging special, and also give you the healing. Overall, my final thoughts on this weapon refined badge is the fact that this is actually a pretty tame refined badge. Summer Lyn is decisively, in my eyes, the best unit out of this badge because of the weapon refine that she has got. But the other units, while not having the most insane refine, can still function and be a lot more viable with their refines now, and can function in their specific roles. And I hope you all enjoyed this video. Make sure to share this video with your friends who are trying to build up any of these units after their weapon refine. I definitely went over a lot of the options and explained them, and if you enjoyed, then please be sure to leave a like and a comment. Helps me tremendously, and if you really enjoyed, you could always support me directly by using super thanks down below or by becoming a YouTube member as well. And for more FEH videos, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell because YouTube sub boxes are about as functional as red armors against Summer Lyn. So with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.